Okay, excellent. Welcome everyone to this IES webinar, The Future of Coastal Lagoons and Why That Matters. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Sian Davies-Bolam, Head of School of the Built and Natural Environment and Head of the Environmental Sustainability Research Centre at the University of Derby. Her current research focuses on the sustainability of coastal environments and communities in West Africa, and she co-leads the Resilient Lagoon Communities Network, which she will be talking about today. After Sian's presentation, as usual, you'll have the opportunities to ask questions, so please do submit these in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. You can do this at any point during the presentation, and I will then read these out on your behalf later on. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the IES website and YouTube channel. Thank you so much for logging in today. It's great to see so many of you here, and thank you to Sian for doing this webinar for us. Over to you, Sian.
Thank you very much, Ethne. And I just want to check that my screen is being shared and everybody can see that well.
Looks good, thank you.
Excellent. Well, so thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you everybody for being here. To start, I need to acknowledge my colleagues in the Resilient Lagoon Network, so my colleagues in Nigeria and Ghana and Benin, without whom this wouldn't be possible. And I also need to acknowledge the AMS GCRF grant that supported the work that you're going to hear about today. So I'm going to start with a little bit about what lagoons are, and then I'll talk about their current state and their importance, particularly in West Africa, and some of the solutions to some of the challenges that they're facing. So lagoons are expanses of water found along low-lying coastlines across the world. They can vary in size from about a football pitch to as large as a country, and that sounds crazy, but the Lagoa de Patos in South America has an area of 10,000 square kilometers, which is the same size as Luxembourg, so that's a pretty big variation in size. They are at the nexus between land and sea. They're a place where river and ocean life and waters mix, so they have a rich biodiversity. They're separated from the ocean by a natural sandy barrier, which acts as a kind of ocean lagoon dam, and that's one of the features that really connects them all. And I hope to show you that they're a critically important coastal environment. And the two images you see here are from lagoons in Ghana and Benin. So lagoons are found across the globe. This map was put together by my colleague in the network, Steve Mitchell at University of Portsmouth, and it shows articles or the location of articles about lagoons over the past couple of years. It isn't fully representative. It's got a focus around Europe because that's where most of the publications have been, but it gives you a sense that there are lagoons everywhere. There are more lagoons in West Africa than that one spot shows, but it just gives you a sense that lagoons are a global coastal environment. I'm going to tell you a little bit about lagoon formation and morphology over the next couple of slides. So the aerial photograph here shows the Mooney Lagoon, a lagoon I've worked at extensively in Ghana. Lagoons were formed at the end of the last ice age when sea levels rose. So as sea levels rose, sand was transported on shore and then redeposited as barriers that at the front of coastal lakes and estuaries, so they contained that water. And you get a sense of that here with the two rivers that you can see draining into the lagoon, and the beach barrier that basically traps the lagoon or acts as a dam between the lagoon and the ocean. So these lagoon barriers, the one that you see in the picture is whole, but many of them have breaks, known as breaches or tidal inlets, which connect the lagoon to the ocean. And these breaks or inlets are important as they act as conduits that allow ocean water and biota to enter and leave the lagoon. So I'm going to focus in on this area that has the blue circle around it and hone in on that to tell you a little bit about the lagoon dynamics. So these are, again, the Mooney Lagoon in Ghana. and you get a sense of the lagoon, the tidal inlet or the breach, the connection between the ocean and the lagoon, and the beach barrier, and what they look like close up. So this connection that the lagoon has with the ocean is dynamic, and it responds to changes in oceanic and weather conditions. It's important because it controls the volume and chemistry of the lagoon's water, and then this has a big influence on the lagoon's ecology and biodiversity. Some lagoons have barriers, the openings that create a permanent connection to the ocean. Some barriers are nearly always closed and are rarely connected to the ocean, and others might have a cycle of opening and closing. So there's quite a lot of variability in that. And the other picture here just shows you a tidal delta that sometimes forms around the inlet when you get deposition of sand. So I want to say a little bit more about that lagoon as a dynamic environment and that lagoon cyclicity. So the lagoon barriers, as I said, can change from whole to breached and vice versa. And that's in response to variation in weather conditions, hydrological conditions, availability of sediment and sea level. Some have a seasonal opening and closing cycle, and that opening allows the movement of water in and out of the lagoon, and then that results in shifts in water temperature, dissolved oxygen content, and concentration of any pollutants that might be in the lagoon. That opening can also alter tidal amplitude, the amount and location of erosion, and sediment deposition, so big changes to physical effects of the lagoon. It can also, that opening, when it occurs and how it occurs, where it occurs, can also have an effect on the incidence, amount and location of flooding in and around the lagoon. So such fluctuations and dynamism in the physical environment then can create unstable and sometimes stressful conditions for lagoon organisms at species, community and ecosystem level. And that might negatively affect their health and productivity, or might promote production and increase biodiversity, just depending on the mix of those physical conditions. So then that in turn influences the availability of natural resources, including fisheries, and that's really important for these coastal communities. So I'm going to tell you a little bit now I've talked about the physical environment of lagoons, about why lagoons matter and what they're important for, and then I'll go on to focus about lagoons in West Africa. So lagoons have a very high biodiversity, and they're often a site of species-rich wetlands, and that's true of lagoons around the world. And they provide an array of fundamental, valuable resources and ecosystem services that are essential to the communities that live around them, whether they're urban communities, rural communities, and the broader regions, coastal regions. In the global south, in particular, they support communities in terms of their livelihood, their well-being, and their food security. And the sustainability of lagoons then is critical for these coastal communities and the wider regions they support. And I've just inserted here some of the sustainable development goals that are important for lagoons to give you that sense of connection to the SDGs. Now, in discussion with a group of coastal researchers that formed the Lagoon Network, we talked about the kind of services, the ecosystem services that lagoons provide. And this was our sort of first pass, with everything from history and culture to transportation, livelihoods, natural resources, tourism, fisheries, food security. It just gives you an idea of the breadth of the ecosystem services that lagoons provide, and how they're important for very many aspects of coastal communities and coastal environments. I'm going to shift now to look at lagoons in West Africa. So we'll focus specifically on that West African coastline. So the map here shows the area from Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast in the west, through to the western part of Nigeria. It doesn't include the Nigeria Delta. And I've located on the map some of the most significant lagoons or lagoon areas. However, there are more than 200 lagoons along this coastline. I could have extended the map much further around the western part of Africa here, but this has been the area in focus of our research initially, so I'm just focusing on this today. So the lagoons along this coastline vary in size as well as their nature of their connection to the ocean. They support urban communities and rural communities. I'll give you an example of the rural community. So you can see I've circled Lagos there. Lagos is situated on the Lekki-Lagos Lagoon Complex in Nigeria. And that lagoon complex parallels the coastline for approximately 200 kilometers and incorporates a number of separate lagoons. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Lagos later, but just to note here, it's one of the fastest growing and biggest cities in Africa, with population estimates of maybe up to 20 million. So that gives you a sense of how important lagoons are in some of these urban environments. There are also many rural lagoons or lagoons that are supporting rural communities in the region, and those tend to be smaller in extent, from a few to tens of square kilometers, and they are all along this region. But I've pinpointed in red here those areas, or those large urban areas that have lagoons that are supporting them. So all of these lagoons along this West African coastlines have high productivity, high biodiversity, or they would do in some cases where they have been experienced anthropogenic activity, or adverse anthropogenic activity, I should say. The key natural resources of the lagoons are fisheries and mangroves. And according to a USAID report in 2014, lagoon settings play a key role to the fisheries in the area and have been recognised as contributing approximately $400 million annually to the regional economy. So really significant for the economy beyond the communities of the lagoons. However, lagoons in this part of the world are facing a variety of threats to their sustainability. And what I want to focus on next is to discuss those threats to their sustainability. So that's where the next few slides will take us. Firstly, climate change. You might have picked up earlier that I mentioned sea level rise and weather cycles, and got the sense that climate change is very impactful to lagoons, and it absolutely is. It impacts lagoons in multiple ways. So sea level rise can cause erosion and increase the risk of flood to lagoon communities. Mangroves, which would be the primary lagoon vegetation and the key natural defense to sea level rise, are increasingly at risk from unsustainable harvesting. So there are two challenges right there: the sea level rise itself, and then the lack of mangroves, or decreasing number of mangroves. Changes to rainfall and temperature patterns have altered that natural lagoon cycle, and therefore caused fluctuations in ecosystem functioning. Changes to climate have also affected fish catch and fishing practice, and then that has implications for the well-being and livelihood of lagoon fishing communities. And the photos that I've got here, so the structure that you see there is Ada Fort in Greater Accra, and it's collapsing due to coastal erosion. The second one with the pictures of palm trees is also at Mooney Lagoon, the pictures that I've shown you previously. And the barrier lagoon itself is eroding there, and you can see that palm tree collapsing rather dramatically into the lagoon. And then the third picture is a lagoon during the dry season, with the lagoon shore exposed. You can see normally that would be covered pretty much by water, and you can see that brown colour is the dryness there. So those are sort of climate change related impacts. I want to talk now about development related impacts. So as I've indicated previously, many of the fastest growing centres of population in Global South are situated at the coast, and as you've seen in that map of West Africa, the bulk of those West African large urban areas and megacities are located in and around lagoons. The economic capital of Ivory Coast, Abidjan, is built around the Ebury Lagoon. The Corley Lagoon has played a significant role in the development of Ghana's capital, Accra. Half of Benin's population live in Cotonou, the capital, which is located around the Kui Lagoon. In Togo, Lomé, the capital, is located around Lake Togo, which is a lagoon. And then we've already mentioned Lagos, Nigeria's largest city and one of the largest cities in Africa, which sits on the shores of the Lagos-Lekki Lagoon complex. And these areas are all facing population growth, issues of waste, problems with waste disposal, sanitation, water quality, and unplanned development. Two of the pictures here, the one you see with the bridge and with the houses built on the lagoon, are from Lagos Lagoon. And then the third picture is fishing, fishing community going out on the lagoon or at the lagoon inlet in close to Ghana. Close to Accra in Ghana. So what I want to do now is sort of bring some of these issues and problems of lagoons together in a kind of a mind map here. So we've put this together really to kind of illustrate the variety of challenges and the interconnectedness of challenges that lagoons are facing in West Africa. So you can see there's one side there related to climate change, with sea level rise, changes to rainfall, changes to ocean water temperature, and storminess and the implications of those. Then an area around sanitation. Lack of toilets and sanitation infrastructure is problematic in lagoon communities, in urban and rural locations. Lack of toilets can force open defecation, and that together with poor sewage management causes water pollution and risk to human health. Water quality also impacted by urban runoff, pollution from petroleum products and discharge of industrial waste, high and heavy metals. There's a lack of access to effective waste management solutions, and the continued use of plastics presents problems for the buildup of solid waste. You can see at the bottom here something around resource management. Lagoons in West Africa provide resources that are really essential to the livelihood and the well-being and health of the communities. So in terms of land, water, wood, and sand as a construction material, building materials for wood, firewood also. And population growth and migration is increasing the pressure on those resources, and it is also in some cases resulting in conflict. So I'm going to go to two separate examples now to give you a sense, and I've mentioned both of them before, the Lagos Lagoon in Nigeria and the Mooney Lagoon in Ghana. But bear these in mind, these diverse set of challenges to West African lagoon communities as we think about these specific examples. So I'll start with Lagos. The large population of Lagos Lagoon, and actually I should say these photos are all courtesy of my colleague in Lagos, Funminayo Doherty, who's part of the Resilient Lagoon Network. That large population of Lagos depends on the lagoon for its water and a source of cheap and affordable protein in the form of fish. So fish is the large part of diet and food security around the lagoon. There are two communities that actually live on the lagoon here, and you can see a couple of those pictures that show the wooden structures, the homes of those two communities. So it provides for them in terms of their homes, but also in terms of their inland waterways, transportation. However, the other side of Lagos Lagoon is the shipping, the industrialization, the petroleum industry activities, and this is causing environmental stress and anthropogenic pollution in the lagoon. In addition to that, there are also changes in sea level and rainfall patterns that have caused increased flooding in the city. So I want to go to Mooney Lagoon now in Ghana. It's a rural lagoon. So I want to give you two examples: an urban lagoon and a rural lagoon. Winneba is the town on which the Mooney Lagoon is situated, and it's about 60 kilometers west of Accra, the capital. It was designated a Ramsar site, a wetland site of international importance, in 1992 because of its habitat diversity. It's globally important as a staging point for migrating water birds, and has relatively good water quality and biodiversity compared to many lagoons in the region. However, there's a rising population, and that is resulting in increasingly polluted runoff into the lagoon, and that's reduced water quality. And the rising population has also led to impingement of building developments on the lagoon shores. But in essence, it's still relatively pristine, although it is experiencing those increasing challenges. However, one of the problems that the lagoon has faced is that originally there were mangroves throughout the lagoon, and they're virtually now non-existent because they've been used as harvested as firewood and for smoking fish catch. So that's the main challenge at the Mooney Lagoon, and then this is causing issues for erosion. So I'm going to know a little bit more about that erosion and lack of mangroves and sea level rise. So this is some work I did a few years ago now. There's Shoreline Retreat, and you can see the two pictures here, impacts of erosion over just a couple of years when the lagoon barrier was open. And then the main picture there shows some projection of sea level rise that we've done on the barrier with a meter sea level rise, just to indicate to you the fragility and the vulnerability of these lagoon barriers. Those black lines show what would remain if there was a meter of sea level rise, although in effect it wouldn't really remain because it's sand and it would get washed away. But just to give you a sense of the vulnerability to sea level rise and the erosion that's going on with increased lagoon opening that this particular lagoon is experiencing. And that orange line, I should say, shows you the same palm tree between 2014 and 2016, and that loss of lagoon barrier, that's very obvious there from the photos. Okay, so I've talked a lot about problems and challenges. I want to focus now on solutions. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Resilient Lagoon Network. This is a network that I co-lead with my colleague Isaac Boateng in Ghana, and we're seeking to provide an international multi-stakeholder platform for tackling the issues that lagoons are facing. We've got an interdisciplinary team of academics, and we have experience in a wide range of fields, from myself as a geoscientist through to social scientists. We are formed from 15 researchers from Benin, Ghana, Nigeria, and the UK, representing a number of institutions there. And one of our key goals is to facilitate dialogue and knowledge transfer between experts from the sciences, but then also engineering and education, but then also having an impact on management and policymaking decisions related to lagoons, and essentially raising awareness, which is what I'm here to do today. Our website is there, we can put that in the chat afterwards, so we can get a sense of, you can get a sense of some of our work in a bit more detail. So I've just kind of shared some of our goals here. We were essentially able to really come forward as a team as a result of the GCRF grant that started last year. So really one of the key things here is that participatory platform. So sharing of expertise, experiences, best practices, and then our overall aim is then to develop a framework and toolkit to address the challenges faced by these lagoon communities. I'm going to share with you some initial results we've got from the first stakeholder conference that we had. I'm conscious of time here, so I won't focus on this slide for too long, but I know I need to finish up soon. So I'll talk about some of the best practices and solutions that have come out of the first stakeholder conference that we held. But I guess before I do that, I do want to stress that the network, although we're initially made up of academics and researchers, we really are trying to reach out and provide that participatory platform and connect policymakers, managers, and coastal communities. So we had our first conference at the start of this month, and that conference was essentially, it brought together environmental managers, some policymakers, into the same sort of virtual space to talk about the challenges that coastal lagoons were facing. And we've collated, or I've started to collate some of that information, and I thought it would be helpful to share with you some of the best practices that were shared at that meeting, or some best practices to aim for. So these are around building capacity, making sure that coastal planning is integrated and has a holistic perspective, the inclusion of stakeholders, those people that live and work around lagoons, very important. And then there was a real note to improve the collaboration and coordination around the management and the use of coastal lagoons. And then the other thing that I want to share with you is around some of the solutions that came out of that conference. So we surveyed participants and listened to them in their discussions. And we said, well, you know, what are the best solutions? What really needs to happen to address the challenges that coastal lagoons and their communities are facing? And really, one of the key things that came out was around environmental education for people that live around lagoons, but also particularly for school children to be able to educate on lagoons and their use and their sustainability. And then beyond that, a lot of it was around reducing the use of plastics, better waste management and recycling, and an understanding of circular economy and supporting livelihoods that were connected or that are connected to the circular economy. And then also around nature-based solutions. I've already mentioned mangroves. Mangroves are really key in addressing sea level rise and erosion. So these were the sort of key solutions that came out of that conference, and we hope to follow up with that conference in June, and then as the network itself hopefully comes together for a face-to-face meeting in July to start to develop the toolkit and framework that can be used to help manage coastal lagoons and ensure their sustainability. So I've put together here some selected references from colleagues in the Lagoon network. It's by no means exhaustive, and there are many other researchers that are working on coastal lagoons. These are just some of us in the Resilient Lagoon network. And then I just wanted to thank everybody for listening, and then to acknowledge the funding we received from the Global Challenges Research Fund. Also my colleagues at University of Education Winneba, which is really the co-lead, and my colleague Professor Isaac Boateng in Winneba. And hopefully, I know that was a quick run around, but I know it was a half an hour, so I apologise for being rapid, and hopefully there are some questions.
Thank you so much, Sian, for that amazing presentation. Really great to hear about a bit about how lagoons are formed and their importance, and some case studies in West Africa. So yes, please do everyone put your questions for Sian in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We've already got some here, so I'll kick off straight away. How would the chemistry of lagoons differ from other types of wetlands or even tidal rock pools, for example?
The chemistry changes for a number of reasons. So there's influx of fresh water for many lagoons, for streams, from streams and rivers. And then when the lagoon is open to the ocean, there's also an influx of ocean waters. So the salinity can vary a lot, which can change chemistry, because compounds can become variously soluble with different salinities. So there's that. But also, if you're in the kind of climate where you have a dry season and a wet season, when that lagoon is closed, you can also have really quite extreme salinity. So during the dry season, when you get evaporation, and then that affects the chemistry as well. So there's really sort of two phases to it. And I think that makes them unique and very different to a rock pool or an estuary, which has that sort of flow through of water. There's far more restrictions around a lagoon.
That's really interesting, thank you. And how can we apply some of your findings to the UK or Europe?
Well, lagoons essentially, work in the same way wherever they are. What differs is that sort of that seasonality and the dry season, and that tropical, subtropical environment with the rainy season and the dry season. So there's not quite the same extremes. And I think the difference between West Africa and Europe is that those West African communities really do rely on their local resources. So they rely exclusively on, well, not exclusively, that's a bit of a large thing to say, but rely on the fisheries for food security. They rely on lagoons when they're not saline for water. They rely on them for their livelihood. So I think that's the difference. But I think in understanding the physical variation and the biological variation of lagoons, they're completely, you can transfer that knowledge to European lagoons. Do you need me to stop sharing my screen, or?
This is completely fine. You can keep it up there if you like. This is a kind of follow-up question. Is a loch a lagoon?
A loch? Maybe. I'm thinking of, my mind's going to the loch that's in, the Seattle area in the Pacific Northwest, and that connects a coastal lake to the ocean. Yes, but a loch is far more controlled. And in some cases, the connection to the lagoon and the ocean has been controlled by humans. It's been engineered to be kept open, often for transport, but many are not, and many, are open and closed, related to ocean and weather conditions. But I guess that's I've never thought of it as a loch. I've always thought of it as a dam that gets breached. But that's interesting. I like that idea.
And what is the projected sea level rise in Western Africa under a 4-degree warming scenario? And how is it considered to impact upon the lagoons in comparison, for example, to a 2-degree warming scenario?
I've not seen that modelling between the 2 degrees and 4 degrees. Obviously, it will speed up sea level rise. What we looked at was a metre projection, because the estimates are that there could well be a metre sea level rise by the end of this century. So that's why we used it. And I think I wouldn't say there's agreement by everyone, but there's certainly a strong possibility that we could get a metre sea level rise. I think with 4 degrees warming, it would come sooner than the end of this century. But for lagoons, essentially you're changing how they operate, because those barriers, particularly the one that you can see in the picture here, I think it shows really well, it's at maximum 1.5 meters above sea level. So and most of it is gone, and then the lagoon becomes an estuary. which is okay, but we need to live with that and adapt to it. You know, on that barrier now, there's a fishing community, and that they live there. That's their livelihood. So it's about how we adapt to those changes in lagoons. Now, for an urban lagoon, what you're going to see is if the barrier is completely urbanized and there are buildings on it, you're just going to get increased flooding to the point that you can't live on there in future. So I think I've rambled a bit on from that initial question, but that's what would happen with sea level rise. And as I say, with more rapid warming, then that's going to happen sooner.
Interesting, thank you. And are some of the climate change threats things like stratification and then anoxia in lagoons?
Yes, they would be, but I think what we've seen in these West African lagoons is that the cyclicity, you would get some of that anyway, in that cyclicity between the rainy season and the dry season, as you get evaporation and less input, you know, less freshwater input. But what has happened, what we've seen is that the rainy seasons are not operating in the same way. They're not as reliable. So that cyclicity has been changing. So the rainy season might come later, or it might be shorter, and that's the change. You would see some stratification anyway at the height of the dry season, but we're losing that ability to, we're losing that cyclicity, and we're shifting the timing and extent of rainy season and dry season, which is really significant for the communities that live here, because their fishing season, their fishing is totally connected to that.
That's really interesting, thank you. And is it possible to clean up lagoons in West Africa from waste, chemicals and sewage in the short term, or is this more of a long-term issue?
I think well, this is going to be a cop-out answer. I think it depends on the nature of the pollution and the size of the lagoon. So the Mooney Lagoon here was suffering from poor water quality, and then the lagoon opened to the ocean and there was a natural flushing. So with those small lagoons, I think it's feasible. And in some cases, you can engineer that opening. With the larger lagoons, like the Lagos Lekki complex, it is more difficult, and the pollution is not just urban runoff. It's some pollution from the petroleum industry. So then that is requiring legislation, which is longer term. You know, you can't just go in there and flush out the lagoon as you can in the small Mooney Lagoon here. So that's longer term.
Interesting. And actually, there's a small question related to that, which is how close are the rural communities to Mooney Lagoon?
Well, you can see the picture here with the palm trees. That's the lagoon barrier, and there's a fishing community there that lives on the lagoon barrier. So it's right there. Yeah. And then in the far distance on that picture, you can see that shoreline, and there's increasing number of people living along the shoreline there. But they're really, and you saw the pictures in Lagos Lagoon where people are living in the lagoon on stilt houses.
Right. And you mentioned legislation before in terms of kind of long-term solutions. The EU has directives in place to help protect their lagoons. Is there anything in place at the moment in West Africa to try and reduce challenges faced by lagoons?
There's varying policy. Some of it is broadly environmental policy. Some of it is wetland associated. The challenge is the implementation of policy, and it's getting that top-down policy actually being realised at a local level, and that's part of what we're trying to do by the lagoon network, is to create that connectivity, because that's been a challenge, and to also raise awareness of the fact that some of that legislation is really not impacting in the way that it should be. But it's that bottom up meets top down, which is so important when you've got communities that are entirely dependent on their local resources and local environment.
Definitely.
It's difficult to fix. We're hoping that we can have some inroad, but it's difficult.
Definitely, and implementation is the challenge being faced among so much legislation at the moment.
And you know, the finance is challenging as well when you're working in West Africa and actually having the resources to be able to implement.
There's a question related to that actually, which is any international finance, for example, as a result of COP26, being allocated to increase climate resilience of lagoons, particularly those that are in close proximity to coastal communities?
I don't know of anything specific. World Bank did do an analysis, and there's a big report that includes a number of West African countries. So they put some resources into that. I don't know of anything specific. You know, I mentioned Ramsar. There's some resources associated with Ramsar, and Mooney has benefited from those. But again, it's that longevity and keeping the resource going and ensuring that management is followed through.
And has the network studied the challenges between the conservation of lagoons and infrastructure projects in the region relating to coastal erosion, for example, groins?
No, we haven't done that. Initially it was to bring the group together. We have various sort of individual and some collaborative research projects going on. I think so. The question about infrastructure, I think that's some of the hard engineering structures are quite challenging and problematic. I know a little of them in Accra. There aren't any in Mooney Lagoon here. I mean, those rural areas don't have that, but some of the urban areas do have infrastructure that is difficult in terms of sea level rise and addressing that. I'm not sure I answered that very well.
That's perfect, thank you. And a final question. Thank you so much for answering so many of our questions today, and great to have many.
Good.
Does your work link with inland initiatives, for example, around firewood to protect mangroves? And would landside climate change effects on vegetation put additional pressure on the mangroves?
I think it varies on lagoon. So can you just run that by me again, because there were two bits to that, and I think I got caught up in the last bit with the.
Of course. Does your work link with inland initiatives, for example, I guess reducing people's collecting mangroves for firewood, in which case kind of protecting mangroves?
So I'll answer that one first. And what's happened in Mooney Lagoon is that's what's happened, is that there is firewood that now comes into the area, and there is replanting at the lagoon. It's been variably successful. There's been reharvesting of that. But there's also the issue of where that inland firewood comes from. So it's really difficult. The alternative is just to try and find a different type of cooking facility, like solar ovens. That's the best way forward. And then the second one, and I know we're running out of time, but
and that would be, would landside climate change effects on vegetation put additional pressure on the mangroves?
Landslide, did you say?
Landside, so climate change effects on kind of terrestrial ecosystems.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, the challenge is when I think Matt is supporting the mangroves, because they are really critical to the lagoons. Yes, you can put up coconut palms here, and they're helpful, but it's the mangroves that really need the focus, because they're going to do the most work.
Thank you so much, Sian. It's really interesting to hear about the connection between mangroves and lagoons, because mangroves are often cited, of course, as a nature-based solution, but you don't often hear about the kind of lagoons which obviously are foundational for this. So thank you so much for that presentation and for answering all those questions. And thank you to all attendees for watching. I hope you all found that as interesting as I did.